The sun was hot in the Arizona desert, beating down on the red earth and turning the horizon into a haze of heat and dust. A lone rider kicked up a trail of grit as he approached a cluster of adobe buildings on the edge of a small frontier town. The air smelled of sage and leather, and the distant howl of coyotes hinted that nightfall might bring relief from the relentless sun, or danger. Wade's boots pressed against the stirrups as he guided his horse into the town square. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional creak of a sign swinging in the wind. He shaded his eyes and scanned the square, looking for the woman who had arrived from the mountains hours before. Swift River. He had been told she carried news that could decide the fate of the territory and perhaps, in some small way, bridge the chasm between settlers and the Apache who roamed the desert beyond. She was already there when he spotted her, standing beside the water trough, her posture straight, her dark hair catching the sunlight like a ribbon of shadow. The horse beneath her shifted its weight uneasily, sensing the tension in the air, or perhaps matching the anticipation Wade felt in his chest. "You came," she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of countless unspoken truths. "I always come," he replied. "Especially when the desert's about to spit fire." Swift River gave a small, wry smile, one that didn't quite reach the intensity in her eyes. "Then let's see what this fire's about." She mounted her horse and motioned for him to follow. The two of them rode out of town together, the sun blazing overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across the canyon walls. Behind them, the town seemed small, fragile, a cluster of adobe and timber dwarfed by the desert around it. Ahead, the horizon shimmered with heat, hiding the mesas and ridges that held both danger and opportunity. They were going to the reservation. Word had come that tensions were rising, that Reed's machinations had stirred unrest, and that a meeting was needed, one that could prevent blood from being spilled. Wade tightened his grip on the reins. He had faced bullets, storms, and death itself, but nothing compared to the uncertainty of negotiating peace between two worlds, both of which he cared for, and both of which had reasons to mistrust him. "Do you think they'll listen?" he asked, glancing at Swift River as they navigated a narrow canyon pass. "They will," she replied. Her eyes never left the trail ahead. "If they don't, we'll make them. But I hope it doesn't come to that." The wind whipped around them, carrying dust and the faint tang of mesquite. The desert was alive, indifferent yet full of memory. Here, among these canyons and scrub, lives had been lost, families torn apart, and yet, Wade thought, perhaps something new could be built. Something stronger than revenge, stronger than fear. As they rode on, the sun dipped toward the horizon, setting the sky ablaze in streaks of crimson and gold. Ahead, the mesas cast long shadows over the desert floor, like guardians of a land that had seen far too much. Here, in this unforgiving landscape, the next chapter would be written. And Wade, for all his scars and mistakes, intended to be part of it. The canyon narrowed as they rode, red walls rising sharply on either side, the path barely wide enough for two horses to pass comfortably. Dust swirled at their hooves, and the only sound was the rhythmic clatter of hooves on stone and the occasional cry of a hawk circling above. "You've been gone a long time," Wade said, breaking the silence. "I don't mean from the town, I mean from your people. From this land." Swift River's jaw tightened. Her eyes remained on the trail ahead, but her voice softened. 15 years. I was too small to remember much when I was taken, and too grown for them to treat me like one of their own when I returned. I learned the ways of the settlers, but not the ways of my people. And now," she shook her head slightly, a shadow of frustration crossing her face, "I need to make it right. To know where I belong." Wade studied her profile, the wind tugging at her hair, the set of her shoulders that suggested both defiance and vulnerability. "You'll find it," he said quietly. "Even if it takes riding through every canyon in Arizona to get there." Ahead, the sun was beginning to sink behind the mesas, the sky a molten mix of orange, violet, and streaks of darkening cloud. Shadows deepened in the canyon, and the air cooled just enough for sweat to sting their eyes less sharply. They reached a fork in the trail where a shallow stream cut across the path. Swift River guided her horse to the water and paused. Wade followed suit. Careful, she warned. The river may look shallow, but there are hidden pockets. Wade dismounted and tested the footing with the tip of his boot. The sand was loose, but stable enough to cross. He helped Swift River steady her horse as they made their way across, the water cold on their boots and hooves. For a moment, the world felt suspended, just the desert, the river, and the approaching dusk. Once across, they climbed a low ridge that offered a panoramic view of the valley beyond. The settlement of the Apache reservation lay ahead, a scattering of earth-toned dwellings nestled against the base of the mountains. Smoke curled from cooking fires, and the faint sound of drums reached them carried on the wind. It was both a warning and a welcome. "They'll see us coming," Swift River said. "And they'll judge me first." "They'll see more than that," Wade replied. "They'll see someone willing to ride this far, under the sun, through dust and heat, to speak with them. That counts for something." A single eagle soared overhead, wings outstretched, cutting a slow arc across the sky. Wade felt the same rush of hope he had felt when he first glimpsed her coming across the desert plains, like the impossible might still be possible. At the valley's entrance, 5 riders emerged from behind a stand of junipers, moving toward them with measured steps. Swift River slowed her horse, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. The Apache had heard of Reed's threats, and the news of potential conflict had reached them. But they also sensed the truth in the 2 riders approaching, truth carried on the strength of courage, experience, and something far older than any law or government decree. Tall Cloud rode at the head, his eyes sharp and discerning beneath the brim of a wide hat. The canyon seemed to fall silent around them, the wind pausing for a heartbeat. When he spoke, it was in the language of his people, and though Wade could not understand the words, he understood the weight. Swift River answered in kind, her voice steady, her gestures precise. Wade stayed just behind her, feeling the tension and the potential in that meeting. Here, at the edge of the desert, the choices of the past 15 years would meet the hopes of the present. And whether it ended in fire or understanding, the desert would remember. The 5 riders slowed as they reached the small rise, eyes scanning Swift River and Wade carefully. Tall Cloud dismounted first, his boots scraping the dusty soil as he approached. Wade felt the weight of the man's gaze, steady and searching, like he could see every choice they had made and every intention behind it. Swift River followed, stepping lightly to the ground, her horse moving instinctively to Wade's side. "Swift River," Tall Cloud said finally, his voice carrying across the valley. "You have returned, but not alone. Who is this man?" Wade stepped forward, offering a measured nod. "I am Wade. I have known Swift River since before she could walk the path we now stand upon. I seek only to honor her people and ensure the truth of past wrongs is heard." The elder's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in careful consideration. "Words are easy, man from the settlers. Proof comes from action." Wade swallowed and let his gaze sweep the canyon around them, the mesas, the scrub, the winding river below that had shaped generations of Apache life. "Then let my actions speak. I will help protect your people, and I will bear witness to the injustices done, and see that they are addressed." Swift River stepped closer to her people, lifting her hands in a gesture of calm. "Reed's lies have spread like wildfire, but they are lies. The federal government knows now. There will be no attack. No war unless provoked by those who serve greed and corruption. My father and I have come to offer truth, not threat." Tall Cloud studied her silently, his eyes flicking briefly to Wade, then back to her. After a long moment, he inclined his head, a small gesture that carried weight. "You speak with your mother's voice," he said softly, almost to himself. "And your father's courage. But courage alone does not mend what has been broken." Swift River's jaw tightened, but her tone remained firm. "No. But it can begin the healing. I have learned what was taken from me. I know now what must be done to honor it. And I want to walk that path, here, among my people, with their guidance and blessing." The elder's eyes softened slightly, though his stance remained firm. "You must understand," he said, gesturing to the valley below. "Trust is not given lightly. We have lost much to those who promised protection but delivered pain. Your words must match your deeds, or the past will overshadow the future. Wade stepped beside Swift River. I will accept no less than full accountability. I have seen what greed and corruption can destroy. I have seen the pain left behind. If you allow me, I will stand beside you to ensure nothing like that ever happens again here. Tall Cloud paused, letting the words sink into the still desert air. He motioned to the others, who shifted slightly, eyes cautious but attentive. Then let the first step be taken here, he said, raising his hand toward the mountains behind them. You will be welcomed into our lands as one who seeks truth. But remember, the land has long memory. Every choice will be remembered. Every word and action weighed. And only by living among us will you prove your intentions. Swift River's lips curved in a small, respectful smile. I understand. And I will honor it. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. Dust rose along the ridges in the evening wind, catching the light in golden streaks. Wade felt the heat of the day finally giving way to the cool desert night, and for the first time in 15 years, he sensed a true possibility of peace, not just between himself and the daughter he had found, but between the settlers and the people who had lived on this land long before any of them had arrived. Tall Cloud mounted again, and one by one the riders followed, their horses moving with deliberate grace back toward the heart of the reservation. Swift River and Wade remained for a moment on the rise, watching, feeling the weight of what had just begun. This is only the start, Wade said quietly. Yes, Swift River replied, her eyes on the valley below. But even the longest river begins with a single step. And tonight we have begun to walk it together. The first morning on the reservation dawned with a sky so wide and pale it seemed to swallow the horizon. Swift River woke before sunrise, the cool air slipping through the openings of the small adobe dwelling she now called home. The smell of damp earth and smoke from early cooking fires filled her senses. She dressed quietly, fastening her moccasins and arranging her hair in the traditional braids she had been taught the night before, careful to honor the customs Tall Cloud had insisted upon. Wade was already awake when she stepped outside. He had spent the pre-dawn hour walking the perimeter of the compound, his hands tucked behind his back, observing the land with the trained eye of a man used to noting detail. The early light revealed the subtle curves of the mesas, the river winding silver far below, and the trails of smoke rising from the encampments. You've been up long, Swift River observed softly, stepping onto the packed dirt path. I like to know where I stand, he said without turning. The land, the people, the routines. You'll find me observant. Sometimes stubbornly so. She smiled faintly, walking to his side. We'll need that. My people watch everything. The land, the animals, each other. If we are to be trusted, we must learn the ways that come before us naturally. He nodded. Then teach me. The morning unfolded slowly. Tall Cloud guided them through the small community, introducing them to elders, warriors, and children alike. Each encounter demanded a careful mixture of respect, humility, and observation. Swift River moved easily, her confidence in her dual identity growing with every interaction. Wade followed closely, conscious of the weight his presence carried, both a foreigner and a man with a past tied to violence and the outside world. They paused at a corral where horses grazed, their tails flicking at flies that hovered in the rising sun. Swift River approached a young mare, speaking softly in Apache, running her hand along the animal's neck. Wade watched her, noting how naturally she navigated between speech, gesture, and touch, an unspoken language of trust. Tall Cloud turned to Wade. Horses are the first measure, he said. They sense truth before words are spoken. Treat them with respect, and they will guide you. Force them, and they will resist. Wade nodded, stepping forward slowly, letting the mare sniff his hand. He spoke in a quiet voice, echoing the tones Swift River had used. The horse lifted its head, ears flicking, and after a tense moment, it relaxed, nudging his palm with its muzzle. Tall Cloud's lips twitched in what might have been the hint of a smile. Later, they were seated with the elders in the shade of a large mesquite. Stories were shared, of ancestors, of battles fought, of survival, of the land itself. Swift River listened intently, translating to Wade when necessary, careful not to lose the poetry and subtle meaning embedded in each tale. Wade found himself struck by the way history was carried in stories, in memory, in ritual. It was not simply knowledge, it was the pulse of the people. The day stretched long, filled with lessons in herbal medicine, tracking, and the careful ways of tending fire and water. Wade absorbed it all, realizing how little of the land he truly understood despite years of frontier experience. Swift River, for her part, demonstrated her growing mastery, asking questions, offering insight, and slowly reclaiming the identity that had been denied to her for so long. As dusk settled, painting the mesas in bruised purple and gold, the community gathered around a central fire. The crackle of flames mixed with the hum of voices, the laughter of children, and the rhythmic beat of drums in the distance. Wade and Swift River sat side by side, the warmth of the fire reflecting off their faces. Tall Cloud approached, handing Swift River a small bundle of sage and herbs. "For protection," he said simply, bowing his head. "The path ahead will not be without danger. Remember the lessons of the land, the river, and the stars. They guide us if we listen." Swift River accepted the bundle with reverence, her eyes meeting Wade's. "We have begun the first steps," she murmured. "But the road is long." Wade's hand found hers, squeezing briefly. "Then we will take it together, one step at a time." Night fell fully, and the desert exhaled, cool and silent. Stars blazed overhead, mirrored in the dark river that cut through the valley. Wade realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that he had never felt truly at home in the desert, never until this moment, sitting beside the daughter he had found, witnessing her reclaim what had been stolen, and knowing he would stand beside her as the future unfolded. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote howled. Swift River listened for a heartbeat, then replied with a soft, melodic call in Apache. The sound carried across the night like a bridge between the old ways and the new. Wade heard her words and understood their meaning without translation, acknowledgement, presence, and unity. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of sage and dust, of distant fires, of the river itself. Wade exhaled, letting the tension of the past weeks ease from his shoulders. This land was harsh, unforgiving, and yet it nurtured what survived within it. So, too, could they nurture what had been lost between their peoples, and within their own fractured family. And for the first time, Wade felt a certainty that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, not as settlers and Apache, not as lost family, but as something entirely new, a bond forged in truth, tempered by the desert, and resilient as the land itself. The next days unfolded in a rhythm dictated by the land and its people. Swift River and Wade rose with the sun, the pale desert lights spilling across the mesas and spilling warmth over the adobe homes of the reservation. There was work to be done, lessons to be absorbed, and trust to be earned, and both approached it with a steady determination. The mornings were often devoted to practical skills. Wade shadowed the older men tending livestock, repairing corrals, and preparing tools for the coming season. He learned, sometimes awkwardly, the precise movements necessary to coax the horses and cattle without angering them. Swift River moved with ease, her confidence radiating in each gesture, in each instruction she offered to Wade. "You grip too tightly," she told him one morning, standing beside a stubborn mare that had refused to step forward. "Force breaks the connection. Patience opens the path. Listen to the rhythm of her breathing. Feel it." Wade adjusted his approach, loosening his hands, leaning slightly back, and suddenly the mare moved forward, stepping carefully onto the trail. A small smile flickered across Swift River's face. "Better," she said simply. Afternoons were given to learning the deeper wisdom of the people. Swift River had insisted Wade accompany her to the elders, where stories and lessons were told not just with words but through songs, chants, and symbolic actions. Wade quickly realized that these lessons were as much about perception as knowledge. A turn of a phrase, a pause, a gesture could convey decades of wisdom in a single moment. One afternoon, they joined a group of women gathering herbs along the riverbank. The air was thick with the scent of sage, wild mint, and the musky fragrance of damp earth. Swift River guided Wade, showing him which plants were edible, which were medicinal, and which required careful handling lest they prove dangerous. Every plant has a spirit, she explained softly, plucking a sprig of wild thyme and inhaling its aroma. Respect the spirit, and it will give you what you need. Take without regard, and it will resist. Wade nodded, mindful not just of the instructions, but of the reverence with which they were given. He noticed how the women moved, their hands tracing arcs in the air, their voices soft but deliberate, as though each action carried meaning beyond the immediate. It was a dance of knowledge and tradition, one that demanded observation and patience. Evenings were the most profound. Around the communal fire, Swift River and Wade would sit with Tall Cloud and other elders as stories unfolded, tales of ancestors, of battles fought not just with weapons but with strategy, wit, and endurance. The narratives painted a living map of the people's history, their struggles, their losses, and their triumphs. Wade found himself drawn into the cadence, the rhythm of storytelling that felt both foreign and familiar. One night, as the fire flickered against the dark horizon, Tall Cloud leaned toward Wade. "You walk a path between worlds," he said, voice low and deliberate. "The people will test you. Not out of malice, but to see if your respect is real. Be patient. Listen more than you speak. Let your actions speak for you." Wade understood the weight of those words. Every movement, every decision here had consequences. His presence was a bridge, fragile yet vital, connecting the life Swift River had reclaimed with the life he had once led. Swift River's growth was evident. Her confidence radiated as she led small groups of youth through basic lessons in horsemanship and survival. She told stories of her mother, Willowong, weaving lessons into her narratives. The children listened with rapt attention, hanging on every word, absorbing the wisdom she imparted not just through speech but through example. But not all interactions were easy. Some of the older men and women were skeptical of Wade, his presence a reminder of the white settlers who had brought war, disease, and oppression. A few mornings he awoke to find horses balking, children wary, or doors closed with a wary glance in his direction. One afternoon, Wade found himself in the center of a tense exchange. A small group of men confronted him near the edge of the grazing fields, their eyes narrowed. "Why are you here?" one asked, voice low but edged with suspicion. "You are not of us. Your kind has done much harm in these lands. How do we know you will not repeat it?" Wade met their gaze steadily. "I cannot erase the past," he said. "But I can choose my actions in the present. I am here to help, to learn, and to honor what has been taken. Trust must be earned, and I am willing to work for it." The men studied him, their silence stretching. Finally, one spoke, tone softer. "Time will show. Words are easy. Actions are harder." With that, they turned and walked away, leaving Wade aware of the fragile balance he had stepped into. Even as he navigated these challenges, Wade's admiration for Swift River deepened. She had become a natural leader, a guide, and a bridge between his world and hers. Each day he observed her, he saw how her presence reshaped the community, how she moved among them not as a stranger, but as one whose blood and spirit belonged here. By the third week, a subtle tension began to creep across the land. Reports arrived from scouts. A group of bandits had been seen moving along the northern trails, preying on travelers, and occasionally attacking isolated homesteads. Though the reservation itself remained untouched, the threat loomed, a reminder that peace here was tentative, not guaranteed. Swift River discussed it with Tall Cloud and the council. "We must prepare," she said. "Our people are strong, but strength alone is not enough. We must watch, plan, and be ready to act with precision." Wade offered his skills. "If there is any medical need, I can prepare supplies, train others to provide care. And if it comes to confrontation, I will fight alongside you. Not as a leader, but as one committed to this community's survival." Tall Cloud studied him carefully. "You speak with honesty. That counts for more than weapons sometimes." That night, as the wind swept across the mesas, carrying the scent of sage and dust, Wade and Swift River sat together outside her dwelling. The stars glittered like frozen campfires in the sky, and the river beyond shimmered in silver threads. "The land tests us in ways I did not expect," Wade said softly, his gaze on the horizon. Swift River nodded. "It is a living thing. Every day brings lessons. Some in skill, some in patience, some in humility. And now, some in vigilance." Wade shifted, glancing at her. "Are you afraid?" She considered the question. "No. Not in the way you think. The fear is there, yes, but it is tempered by understanding. By knowing where I stand, who I am, and the people I stand beside. Fear without purpose is dangerous. Fear guided by knowledge and respect is a tool. We can use it to stay alive, to act wisely." He reached out, taking her hand. "Then we will use it wisely. Together." Swift River's eyes softened, and for a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of sage in the wind, the quiet murmur of the river threading through the valley below. They were far from the city, from the corruption that had marked Reed's reign, from the fragmented histories of settlers and Apache alike. Yet here, in the open desert, they began to understand the true meaning of home, not a place, but a connection, a shared purpose, and the unspoken promise of protection and respect. And while threats lingered beyond the horizon, the days ahead held potential. Not just for survival, but for building something enduring, a bridge between worlds, a reconciliation of past wrongs, and the fragile, stubborn growth of trust. As the fire smoldered and the stars wheeled overhead, Wade realized with quiet certainty that this was the life he had been searching for, not in the world he had known, not in the clinic or the city, but here, in the rhythm of the land, the lessons of the people, and the steadfast presence of the daughter he had finally found. The desert around them was quiet now, the wind softened to a warm, steady sigh that ruffled the edges of Wade's coat and carried the scent of sage and sun-baked earth. He and Swift River sat side by side on the rough-hewn porch of the clinic, watching the horizon where the mountains blurred into the golden haze of late afternoon. The silence wasn't awkward, it was easy, a shared pause after the storm of revelation and reunion, a rare moment to simply exist together without danger pressing in on every side. Swift River traced a finger along the carved patterns on the armrest of the bench, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Wade watched her, noticing the way the sunlight caught in the strands of her hair, highlighting the subtle reddish gold tones that had always seemed to him a living echo of Willow. She was stronger than he remembered her as a child, yet the vulnerability that had clung to her during the first days of their reunion was still there, a delicate thread he would guard fiercely. "You know," she said, finally breaking the quiet, "I've been thinking about how much time we lost. How much of our lives were stolen from us." Her voice was calm, but the weight beneath it was unmistakable. Wade nodded slowly. He had thought about that every day for 15 years, the child he had lost, the life that could have been. "And yet," he said, "here we are. Maybe the years we lost shaped us for this moment, for understanding each other as we do now. It's not a replacement for what was gone, but it's something real we can build on." Swift River looked at him, her eyes reflecting the deep violet of the desert shadows stretching across the courtyard. "Real," she repeated softly. "Yes. That's what I want. To make this real. For both of us." She leaned back against the bench, closing her eyes briefly, as if memorizing the sound of the wind and the warmth of the sun on her face. Wade followed suit, letting the stillness settle around them, grounding him in the certainty that whatever the future held, they faced it together. The sound of approaching hooves eventually drew their attention. Across the courtyard, a young Apache apprentice, his face earnest with excitement, rode up on a compact chestnut horse. He carried a bundle wrapped in soft deer hide, tied carefully with leather cords. Dismounting, he approached with respectful deference. "Swift River," he said, bowing slightly. "The elders sent this for your father. They wish you to have it as a symbol of welcome and protection on your new work." Swift River took the bundle with both hands, her eyes brightening. "Thank you, Tay," she said warmly. "We'll accept this with honor." She handed it to Wade. He untied the cords carefully, revealing a small, intricately carved medicine box, decorated with inlaid turquoise and silver. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each detail a testament to the skill and care of the hands that had made it. Inside, he found a collection of small tools, herbs, and polished stones, a combination of practical and symbolic gifts, intended to support him in his work with both settlers and the Apache community. I don't know what to say, Wade murmured, touched by the thoughtfulness. Swift River smiled, placing a hand on his arm. You don't need words. Just your promise to use this well. To heal, to teach, to protect. He nodded, overwhelmed by the weight of the gesture and the trust it represented. That evening, after the apprentices had finished their rounds and the sun dipped fully behind the distant mountains, Wade and Swift River sat outside, the cool desert air wrapping around them. They spoke of plans, how the clinic would expand, which areas of the territory lacked medical care, how they could create a network connecting settlers and the Apache, so that both communities could rely on shared resources rather than fear and suspicion. Each plan seemed ambitious, but in the presence of one another, it felt possible. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life began to settle. Wade trained apprentices, supervised the construction of new wards, and coordinated supply lines from the city. Swift River split her time between the clinic and the reservation, learning traditional healing practices, the significance of seasonal rituals, and the language nuances that connected generations of her people. At night, they met on the clinic porch or beneath the wide, starlit sky to share stories and reflect on the day. One evening, as the moon rose bright and silver over the horizon, Swift River handed Wade a leather-bound journal. It belonged to my mother, she said softly. She wanted me to have it when I could understand her teachings properly. Opening it, Wade found pages filled with careful script, notes on herbal remedies, reflections on life, and stories of diplomacy and understanding between the Apache and settlers. It was more than a keepsake, it was a bridge across time. He looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers in the glow of the moonlight. She would be proud of what you're doing. Of both of us. Of this life we're building together. Swift River's gaze softened. And I'm proud of you, she said simply, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. They sat together, two lives converging after years of separation, each aware of the past, each mindful of the future, yet content to exist in the quiet strength of the present. The desert night stretched around them, vast and unbroken, and for the first time in decades, Wade felt a sense of absolute peace, not fleeting, not conditional, but enduring. The daughter he had found, the heritage he had helped restore, the trust and respect between people once divided, all of it coalesced into a fragile but luminous hope. A promise that the land, harsh and unforgiving though it could be, also had a way of nurturing life, resilience, and reconciliation in its own time. And above them, the stars burned steadily, as if watching, approving, and waiting for the next chapter of a story that had already endured far more than most could imagine. The following morning, the desert sun rose with unrelenting intensity, painting the mesas and valleys with stark, sharp lines of light and shadow. Wade had already begun his rounds at the clinic, examining patients and instructing the apprentices, but his mind kept drifting to Swift River. She had returned late from the reservation the night before, her stories of ceremonies, healing practices, and tribal gatherings flowing in rich, vibrant detail. He listened as she spoke of dances performed to honor the spirits of the mountains, of songs that carried the history of her people, and of the moments of laughter and friendship that now filled spaces that had once been void of connection. By mid-morning, the heat had grown oppressive. Dust swirled across the courtyard, catching in the sunlight like flecks of gold. Swift River emerged from the clinic, her clothing now reflecting a mix of practical frontier wear and traditional Apache ornamentation. She moved with the easy grace of someone entirely at home in both worlds, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of activity beyond the clinic's walls. Wade followed her, carrying a stack of supplies for the apprentices who were preparing to tend to patients in the outskirts of the territory. The work was endless, but fulfilling. Settlers and Apache alike came seeking medical attention, advice, or just the reassurance of a friendly face. Each patient reminded Wade of why he had returned to this land, not for glory, not for recognition, but to help rebuild the fragile bonds between communities, to bring care where it had long been absent. Swift River assisted him, her knowledge of both Western medicine and traditional healing blending seamlessly to create treatments that were innovative yet respectful of heritage. One afternoon, a delegation arrived from the northern settlements, riders carrying word of escalating tensions over land disputes and water rights. Wade and Swift River met them outside the clinic, exchanging greetings and quickly assessing the situation. Disputes over grazing land had turned violent in some areas, and rumors of retaliation threatened to escalate the conflicts further. The delegation came seeking guidance, hoping for mediation and practical solutions. Wade considered the problem carefully. "We'll need to establish a neutral meeting ground," he said, glancing at Swift River. "Somewhere both sides can feel safe and respected. I can provide medical support, but we'll need to rely on your cultural authority, Swift River." She nodded, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "We'll need elders from both sides present," she said. "And we'll need to speak openly about what's at stake, not just the land, but the lives tied to it, the traditions at risk. If we approach this with honesty and ceremony, I believe we can prevent bloodshed." By the next morning, the neutral meeting site had been established in a wide, flat valley where water from a small creek made the ground fertile and green despite the surrounding desert. Tents were set up, fires lit, and elders from both the Apache and settler communities gathered, their faces drawn with concern yet glimmering with hope. Wade and Swift River acted as mediators, guiding the conversations with patience and care. He handled medical concerns, ensuring that anyone injured or ill received prompt attention, while she drew on the lessons learned from her mother's teachings to facilitate dialogue that honored both cultural perspectives. The first day was tense. Words were sharp, accusations flew, and history's bitterness threatened to undo progress. But by nightfall, thanks to Swift River's steady leadership and Wade's unwavering fairness, the mood had shifted. Small concessions were made, compromises accepted, and the parties agreed to continue discussions the next morning. Wade and Swift River watched the sunset together, exhaustion heavy on their shoulders, yet both felt a growing sense of accomplishment. This was the work Willong had dreamed of, and now it was their responsibility to carry it forward. Weeks turned into months. The clinic expanded, more apprentices joined, and Wade found himself at the center of a network of healers, mediators, and community leaders. Swift River spent extended periods on the reservation, learning ceremonial practices, language, and traditional healing. She returned with wisdom and insight, enriching the clinic's work and strengthening ties between communities. Their relationship deepened, no longer just father and daughter, but partners in the reconstruction of a fractured territory. One day, a rider arrived with urgent news. Harlan Reed had escaped temporary custody during his transfer to Washington. Though he had been caught again by federal authorities, his boldness stirred fear that his influence might still reach into the territory. Wade and Swift River responded quickly, organizing communication lines and ensuring that any towns or settlements previously under Reed's sway were aware of the renewed threat. Swift River, with Tall Cloud's guidance, coordinated patrols on the reservation, while Wade managed medical and logistical preparations. The territory felt tense again, but this time, the people had resources, leadership, and hope. The trial of Reed resumed weeks later in the city of Santa Fe, this time with tighter security. Wade and Swift River's testimonies had become central to the proceedings, alongside Cooper's meticulous documentation of corruption and malfeasance. Reed's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence and eyewitness accounts, revealing the depth of his crimes: murder, land seizure, and manipulation of both territorial officials and settlers. Finally, when the verdict was read, Reed was sentenced to a long prison term in Washington, his power permanently diminished. The city exhaled collectively, and a wave of cautious optimism swept through both settler and Apache communities. Wade and Swift River returned to the clinic after the trial, finding that life had continued in their absence. New patients awaited them, apprentices had made progress, and the land itself seemed to breathe a little easier, as though sensing the renewed cooperation between its people. That evening, under a canopy of stars, They sat quietly on the porch, reflecting on everything that had transpired. "We've done a lot," Wade said, voice low but filled with pride. "Not just for the territory, but for us, for the people. The work isn't finished, but we're making a difference." Swift River rested her hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "And we will continue. Together," she said. "The past shaped us, yes, but the future, that's ours to build." Days bled into weeks, and the rhythm of life settled into a steady cadence. Scouts and riders brought news of scattered disputes, minor skirmishes, and territorial challenges, all of which Wade and Swift River addressed with a mix of diplomacy, medical aid, and personal leadership. Their influence grew, and with it, the sense that the territory could truly change, not overnight, but steadily, as long as the principles of respect, understanding, and justice guided them. Spring arrived, bringing wildflowers that splashed color across the desert floor. Swift River returned from a visit to the northern reservations with a wealth of knowledge, new apprentices, and ceremonial objects she had been entrusted with. She shared stories of dances, rites of passage, and seasonal rituals that deepened the understanding of her people's relationship with the land. Wade absorbed these lessons, recognizing their importance not just for the Apache, but for anyone who wished to live harmoniously in this harsh, beautiful territory. Summer's heat pressed down relentlessly, turning the dusty trail leading to the clinic into a shimmering ribbon of light. Wade rode alongside Swift River, the morning air already heavy with the scent of sage and dry earth. Their horses trotted steadily, carrying them to a settlement on the edge of Apache territory where a wave of illness had struck, exacerbated by contaminated water and poor sanitation. The clinic had grown over the past months into a bustling hub of healing and education. Apprentices, both Apache and settler, worked side by side under Wade's supervision, learning everything from wound care to herbal remedies, and increasingly taking on responsibilities that allowed Wade and Swift River to travel and mediate disputes. Today's trip was urgent, families were ill, and without intervention, the disease threatened to spread across neighboring settlements. Upon arrival, Wade immediately set up triage, while Swift River coordinated with community leaders, translating not only language but culture, ensuring patients trusted the treatment and followed protocols. Children clung to parents, elders stood with wary expressions, and the sick and weak filled the shade of whatever structures were available. Wade moved methodically, assessing fever, dehydration, and infection, while Swift River walked among the families, offering reassurance and explaining the remedies they would use. By midday, the work became grueling. Wade's hands were raw from bandaging burns and wounds, and the sun blistered the backs of his neck and arms despite his hat and clothing. Sweat traced lines down Swift River's face, but her focus never wavered. She carried a small satchel of traditional medicines, preparing poultices and teas with precision, explaining to the apprentices not only how to use them, but why each component was significant. As they worked, a rider arrived, dust trailing behind him like a dark cloud. He handed Swift River a note sealed with the emblem of Tall Cloud's Council. Her eyes scanned the contents rapidly, and her expression darkened. "What is it?" Wade asked. "News from the reservation," she replied, her voice tight. "There's unrest. Some young warriors have taken matters into their own hands, crossing into disputed territory without council approval. There's fear this could reignite conflicts we've worked so hard to calm." Wade frowned, understanding immediately the precariousness of the situation. "We can't let this spiral," he said. "We'll need to act swiftly, but carefully. If we confront them without context, it could be seen as aggression." Swift River nodded. "We leave at first light. We need dialogue, not force. But we cannot ignore the potential danger to settlers, or to the Apache youth who may not understand the broader stakes." That night, the clinic was unusually quiet. Most patients had been stabilized or moved to temporary shelters under apprentice supervision. Wade and Swift River sat together outside, watching stars blink into existence over the desert, the same stars Willowong had once told them were the campfires of ancestors. "I've been thinking about my people," Swift River said softly. "About the ways in which leadership isn't just about giving orders, but understanding context, history, and emotion. I see now that my mother wasn't just a healer, she was a bridge. And now, I have to be that bridge too. Wade reached over, resting a hand over hers. You've always had that strength. It's just that now the weight is yours to carry too. But you won't carry it alone. Morning brought the long ride into the northern hills, where Apache youth had clashed with settlers over grazing lands. Swift River rode at the front, a mix of dignity, authority, and empathy in her posture. Wade followed closely, ready to intervene if negotiations failed, but trusting her judgment implicitly. When they arrived, the scene was tense. Young warriors and settlers faced off, weapons at the ready, voices raised in anger and fear. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and mounting hostility. Swift River dismounted first, stepping forward with hands open in a gesture of peace. Wade followed, remaining slightly behind, hands resting lightly on his saddle, signaling both readiness and restraint. Hold! She called out in Apache, her voice clear and commanding. We speak before we act. The crowd paused, and silence fell, punctuated only by the wind moving across the valley. Swift River walked slowly toward the center, her eyes meeting the youth and the settlers alike. This land, she said, switching into English, is not ours to destroy with anger. Your fathers, your elders, and my people have lived with its gifts and its hardships. There is no honor in shedding blood where dialogue can work. I am Swift River, daughter of Willowong and Jackson Wade. I am one of your people, and yet I understand both sides. Listen to me. The crowd was hesitant, but her tone carried weight beyond her words. Slowly, the young warriors lowered their weapons, muttering among themselves. Wade stepped forward, offering medical supplies, food, and water. We can help, he said. But only if you agree to meet and talk, without violence. You will not be punished for seeking justice for yourselves, but we cannot let revenge guide our actions. Over several hours, negotiation continued, with Swift River translating and contextualizing the settlers' grievances and the Apache youth's anger. By sunset, a fragile agreement had been reached. Grazing rights would be shared temporarily, with oversight from elders and the clinic's apprentices providing support where needed. Relief was palpable, though it was understood that this peace would need to be nurtured carefully. As the crowd dispersed, Wade and Swift River sat on a boulder overlooking the valley. Sweat and dust covered them both, but there was satisfaction in their exhaustion. Every time we think we've achieved stability, Wade said, the land and its people remind us that nothing is ever simple. Swift River nodded. And every time we respond with wisdom, patience, and care, the land and its people show us what's possible. We're not just surviving here, we're building something new. Something lasting. Their connection deepened further in the weeks that followed. Swift River split her time between the reservation and the clinic, teaching apprentices and learning from elders. Wade focused on medical outreach, building relationships across the territory, and training apprentices in both medical skill and the ethics of service. Together, they became a symbol of cooperation, a living testament to what could be achieved when past grievances were acknowledged but not allowed to dictate the present. In late summer, a new challenge arrived. A violent storm swept through the desert, causing flash floods in low-lying settlements. Families were trapped, livestock drowned, and infrastructure destroyed. Wade and Swift River mobilized immediately, coordinating relief efforts with apprentices, elders, and settlers. They treated injuries, distributed food and water, and helped rebuild homes and fences. The sheer scale of the disaster tested every resource, every skill, and every ounce of patience they possessed, yet their leadership turned chaos into coordinated recovery. Amid the destruction, the resilience of the communities became clear. Apache and settler families worked side by side to repair fences, dig irrigation channels, and rescue stranded livestock. Children laughed despite mud and exhaustion, elders guided efforts with quiet authority, and Wade and Swift River oversaw operations with calm decisiveness. By nightfall, temporary shelters were established, patients stabilized, and the first stage of reconstruction complete. That evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Wade and Swift River shared a quiet moment under a canopy of stars, their hands intertwined. The storm had reminded them of the fragility of life, yet also of the extraordinary strength of people united by common purpose. "We're far from done," Wade said. "But every day, every effort, it's building something no one can take away." Swift River rested her head on his shoulder. "And we'll continue together. Not because the land is easy, but because it's worth it." The desert stretched endlessly before them, illuminated by moonlight and the faint glow of distant fires. They were no longer just survivors of the past, they were architects of a new future, one forged through understanding, courage, and the steadfast presence of family, community, and the land itself. The days following the storm passed in a blur of work and quiet reflection. The settlements slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the flood lingered in everyone's minds. Wade and Swift River had become anchors for the community. Their guidance and skill transformed panic into order, fear into hope. Apprentices now moved with confidence, knowing that the lessons learned under their mentors extended beyond medicine, lessons of diplomacy, empathy, and resilience. One morning, a messenger arrived at the clinic with news from Santa Fe. Reed's trial was nearing its conclusion, and testimonies from Wade, Swift River, and Cooper had solidified the federal case against him and his accomplices. For the first time in years, the territory could glimpse a justice system functioning not as an instrument of corruption, but as a means of accountability. Swift River studied the letter with quiet intensity. "It's almost over," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and reflection. "The man who took everything from my mother, and indirectly from me, will finally face the consequences." Wade placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Justice isn't always clean, and it won't bring back the years lost, but it will close a door. And it allows us to open a new one, for our people, and for this land." The following week, they traveled to Santa Fe for the trial's conclusion. The courthouse was packed, a hum of tension and anticipation vibrating through its adobe walls. Local settlers, federal officials, and Apache representatives filled the gallery, all bearing witness to the trial that had become a turning point for the territory. Inside the courtroom, Reed looked smaller than Wade remembered, his arrogance eroded by the meticulous weight of the evidence against him. Witnesses recounted stories of corruption, abuse of power, and violence. Cooper's testimony was particularly damning. His decades of careful record-keeping left no room for doubt. Swift River gave her own statement, articulating the truth of her survival, her mother's legacy, and the systemic harm Reed had wrought. When the verdict was read, a collective exhale filled the room. Guilty on all counts. Reed was sentenced to life in federal prison, his accomplices receiving varying terms for their complicity. The judge's gavel fell like a hammer striking a long-closed lock, freeing the territory from the shadow Reed had cast. Outside the courthouse, Wade and Swift River were met by Tall Cloud and several council elders. There were nods of respect, hands pressed in greeting, and a quiet recognition of the years lost and the futures gained. Tall Cloud spoke first, his voice measured but warm. "This is a moment of justice, not vengeance. Your presence here, your courage, has ensured our peoples can begin again, together." Swift River inclined her head, acknowledging the depth of his words. "We are committed to building what was lost. To ensure that the past informs us, but does not chain us." Tall Cloud's gaze shifted to Wade. "And you, who have walked alongside her, have shown that the bridge between our peoples can be built with hands that heal, and hearts that listen." The return journey to the clinic was quiet, each traveler lost in thought. The land seemed renewed after the storm, the desert grasses greener, the sky clearer, as if the territory itself mirrored the tentative hope growing in their hearts. At the clinic, life settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and demanding. Apprentices now acted with increasing independence, and the settlement's people had developed routines around health, water purification, and agriculture. Wade and Swift River had become a center of trust. Their counsel sought not only for illness but for disputes, education, and diplomacy. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant mesas, Swift River approached Wade while he tended to a wounded calf. She carried a bundle of dried herbs, a gift from the elders. They asked me to give these to you, she said softly. For protection, but also as a symbol. Every life you save strengthens the bond between our worlds. Wade accepted the gift with gratitude, placing it carefully near his bedroll. Every day here reminds me why we do this. Not just to heal bodies, but to heal history, wounds unseen, but no less real. The following weeks brought additional challenges. A smallpox outbreak threatened nearby settlements, requiring a swift and organized response. Wade and Swift River coordinated inoculations, quarantine procedures, and educational sessions. Apprentices worked tirelessly under their direction, learning to manage panic, logistics, and cultural sensitivities simultaneously. During this time, Swift River deepened her connection to her Apache heritage. She learned hunting techniques, herbal medicine, and spiritual practices from the elders. These lessons gave her a profound sense of identity and purpose, complementing the skills and experiences she had gained with the Bennetts and during her years among settlers. Her dual knowledge made her uniquely capable of mediating between communities and solving problems that neither side could handle alone. Late one afternoon, as she returned from a lesson with an elder, she found Wade sitting on the porch, writing letters and reviewing medical records. The sun bathed the clinic in golden light, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. She approached silently, letting him finish his thought before sitting beside him. "Every day I learn something new," she said, watching the horizon. "About my people, the land, and about myself." Wade looked up, a small smile forming. "And every day I learn more about what it means to be a father, a healer, and a bridge. Not perfect, but present." Swift River leaned against him briefly. "I think my mother would be proud," she whispered. "Of both of us," Wade replied, resting a hand on hers. "For surviving, for fighting, and for building something better." As the seasons changed, the clinic became a symbol of hope. The combined efforts of Apache and settlers created a unique community that transcended old hostilities. Children of both heritages played together, apprentices learned from one another, and disputes that once would have ended in violence were resolved with discussion and compromise. Wade and Swift River continued to visit Santa Fe periodically, attending governmental meetings and advocating for continued reform. Their influence extended beyond the clinic, inspiring other territories to reconsider policies and practices that had long marginalized native communities. Cooper remained a close ally, documenting changes, ensuring promises were fulfilled, and providing a historical record that would guide future generations. One night, as the desert sky exploded with stars, Swift River and Wade sat outside the clinic, drinking tea and reflecting. "We've come far," she said quietly. Wade nodded. "And yet, there's always more to do. But I wouldn't want to face it with anyone else." "I feel the same," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "Here, in this place, with our people, our friends, our land, we are exactly where we need to be." The wind stirred the sage around them, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains. The desert had survived storms, floods, and droughts, and now it thrived in the careful stewardship of those who had learned to listen, to heal, and to respect. Wade and Swift River remained there into the quiet of night, the clinic behind them, the land ahead, and the promise of continued growth and understanding stretching across the horizon. For them, the journey was ongoing, not of revenge, or recovery, or closure alone, but of connection, to each other, to their ancestors, and to the future they were building together. Winter approached slowly, brushing the mesas with frost in the mornings and leaving nights sharp and clear. The clinic remained a hub of life, its wooden walls filled with the bustle of apprentices, patience, and the quiet hum of diligence. Wade rose before dawn most days, checking on the sick and preparing supplies. Swift River's routine mirrored his, though her work often took her deep into the surrounding mesas with elders, gathering herbs, learning tracking techniques, or participating in spiritual ceremonies that connected her to her mother's people. One morning, a rider approached the clinic from the north, dust trailing behind his horse like a comet. As he drew near, Wade recognized Tall Cloud leading a small delegation of elders and young warriors. They brought news from the reservation, official recognition of ongoing cooperation agreements between the Apache and federal authorities, new educational initiatives for children of both communities, and a plan to establish a communal council where settlers and Apache could resolve disputes together. Swift River met them outside, bowing respectfully to each elder. She translated for Wade, whose attention flicked between the delegations and the horizon. This was more than ceremony. It was foundation laying for generations to come. Tall Cloud handed her a sealed bundle, the parchment inside marked with official seals and signatures from both territorial governors and Apache Council leaders. "You have done well," Tall Cloud said, his voice carrying weight. "Not just in surviving, not just in justice, but in shaping a future where our children will know trust rather than fear. Where the past informs, but does not control, what comes next." Swift River's eyes glistened with the unspoken emotion of responsibility and pride. "We are only the beginning," she replied softly. "The work is ours to continue, and to teach others to continue after us." Days passed with preparations for a midwinter council meeting in Santa Fe, where Apache elders, settlers, and federal officials would convene to formalize the agreements. Wade and Swift River traveled together, their horses navigating trails coated with frost. The air smelled of juniper and cold earth. Along the journey, they spoke little, the silence between them comfortable, filled with shared reflection rather than emptiness. At the council meeting, tensions of the past were addressed openly. Elder representatives recounted historical grievances, settlers spoke of misunderstandings and harm inflicted by Reed's corruption, and federal agents outlined new measures of accountability. Wade and Swift River observed, contributing when appropriate, their presence a symbol of unity. Children, apprentices, and young members of both communities watched from the edges, learning firsthand the value of dialogue, compromise, and shared purpose. The meeting concluded with ceremonies of exchange, gifts representing respect and cooperation. Wade received a finely woven blanket from the Apache, the patterns echoing the mountains, rivers, and deserts he had come to know intimately. Swift River was presented with a ceremonial necklace, honoring her dual heritage and her role as a bridge between worlds. Returning to the clinic, the air was crisp and still. Snow dusted the distant mesas, and the settlement's lights glimmered in the early twilight. Inside, Wade and Swift River reviewed the clinic's records and plans. Apprentices were now managing day-to-day operations with increasing independence, and the community's health had measurably improved since their arrival. The work was never-ending, but it was fulfilling, meaningful in a way that transcended personal ambition or recognition. One evening, as twilight bled into the desert sky, Swift River approached Wade carrying a small bundle. Inside were letters from families on the reservation, thank-you notes for medical care, for teaching their children, and for guiding settlers toward understanding and cooperation. Wade read each aloud, the words resonating like music in the adobe walls. "This," he said finally, his voice low and steady, "this is why we do it. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for people. Every life we touch matters." Swift River leaned against him, warmth radiating despite the chill in the air. "And we will touch many more. Together, we can make sure the bridges we build hold, that they don't crumble under the weight of history or mistrust." The days grew longer, and spring hinted at renewal. Crops planted during the thaw of winter began to sprout, and apprentices worked alongside settlers and Apache children in a cooperative rhythm that had been unimaginable months ago. News from Santa Fe reported continued reforms. Remaining officials involved in corruption were investigated, resources allocated to previously neglected communities, and treaties reinforced with the active participation of both Apache and federal representatives. Cooper, having fully recovered, remained an integral part of the operation, his investigative skills redirected toward ensuring compliance and transparency. His presence was both a practical resource and a symbol, proof that dedication, persistence, and integrity could alter the trajectory of entire communities. One late afternoon, Wade and Swift River rode along the mesas, surveying the land that had shaped their lives. The wind carried scents of sage and earth, the horizon brushed in hues of crimson and gold by the setting sun. Swift River guided Wade to a small rise overlooking the settlement and the clinic below. This land has seen too much suffering, she said softly. But it has also seen survival, renewal. And now, perhaps, it will see something different. Something better. Wade nodded, his hand finding hers in the cold. It's ours to care for, to protect, and to pass on. Not just the land, but the trust, the connections, the lessons we've learned. That's the legacy we leave. Swift River looked at him, eyes reflecting both the sky and the weight of memory. And with that, we move forward, not forgetting the past, but not letting it define us either. Winter gave way to spring fully, and the clinic thrived. Families grew, apprentices graduated to full practitioners, and the community flourished. Stories of survival, resilience, and reconciliation spread, reaching other territories and inspiring reform elsewhere. Wade and Swift River continued their work, their bond now unshakable not by sentiment alone, but by shared experience, trust, and the deliberate choice to build something enduring. They taught, healed, mediated, and most importantly, listened. Their combined presence became a living testament to the possibility of coexistence and understanding between peoples long divided. One evening, as the desert sun set behind the mountains, Swift River Ruth, Lily in the private spaces of her family, sat beside Wade on the porch of the clinic. The air smelled of blooming desert flowers, and the horizon burned with colors of hope and renewal. She touched the bracelet of horsehair and silver beads he had received months ago, a symbol of connection, family, and unity. To new beginnings, Wade said, raising his hand toward the sky. And to all the connections we've restored, Swift River replied, placing her hand over his. Together, they watched as the stars emerged, one by one, like campfires of ancestors, witnesses to survival, courage, and the promise of a future shaped by choice rather than cruelty. The desert stretched endlessly around them, harsh yet forgiving, a land that mirrored the resilience of those who walked upon it. Wade and Swift River, father and daughter, healer and bridge, friend and family, had finally carved a place in it. Not perfect, not easy, but wholly theirs. And in that quiet night, under the vast sky, they understood fully, the journey had ended not with an ending, but with a beginning, one that would endure as long as the desert itself.